Today, we're going to tear down something we all take for granted, the forecast. We use them for literally everything, our businesses, our money, you name it. But what if the whole idea of trying to predict the future is, well, just plain wrong? Let's get into it. Okay, so we're kicking things off with a pretty provocative quote from Pierre Wack. He was a visionary at Royal Dutch Shell, and he basically said that trying to pin the future down to a single number isn't just a waste of time, it's actively dangerous. And believe me, he came with receipts. So let's travel back to 1977. You've got all the big players, major oil companies, the OECD, basically the smartest guys in any room, all making their predictions for oil demand. And these weren't just shots in the dark. We're talking sophisticated models, complex math, and they all said the exact same thing. Demand is going to the moon. And then the real world showed up. Actual demand didn't just miss the mark, it wasn't even in the same ballpark. All those billions of dollars that were invested based on those confident predictions, Pierre Wack had a name for them: wreckages. And this huge gap, this chasm between what we think will happen and what actually does, is exactly what we're talking about today. You see, this constant failure to predict the future does more than just lose money. It creates this really corrosive problem, something Wack called the moving scythe. And it has the power to destroy the whole point of planning in the first place. He told this story about a big chemical company. Every year, like clockwork, they'd roll out a brand new 5-year forecast. And every single year, that forecast would be completely different from the last one, always scrambling to catch up with a reality that looked nothing like their plans. Now, just imagine you're a manager in that company. You get handed the new plan, and you just know it's going to be garbage by next year. Planning becomes, as Wack so brilliantly put it, a kind of dead religion, a pure ritual in which nobody believes. So you have to ask, right? If forecasts are this bad, why on earth do we keep using them? And this gets us to this really fascinating, kind of mind-bending paradox. Okay, get ready for this, because it's a big one. Wack's killer insight was that forecasts are dangerous because they're usually right. Yeah, you heard me. See, when things are stable and predictable, forecasts work great. They lull us into this false sense of security. The problem is, they're built on one giant, unspoken assumption that the basic rules of the game aren't going to change. So when a huge shift does happen, an oil crisis, a financial meltdown, the forecast is completely blind. It fails you at the precise moment you need guidance the most. There's this old proverb that just nails it. Even if a forecaster happens to guess right, they're still lying to you. How? Because you start to believe the world is predictable, you think they figured it out, when really, they just got lucky. It builds up this confidence that's as fragile as a house of cards. All right, so if forecasting is out, what's the alternative? This is where Wath introduces a totally different way of thinking. It's called scenario planning. But forget everything you think that means. This isn't about daydreaming about crazy futures. It's about seeing, with absolute clarity, what's already unfolding right in front of us. And the cornerstone, the absolute bedrock of this whole approach is something called a predetermined element. Don't let the fancy name fool you. It's simple. It's just a future consequence of something that has already happened. It's not magic, it's just logic. Wack had this amazing analogy to make it real. Think about the Ganges River. If there are massive monsoon rains up in the Himalayas, that's a fact. It already happened. You can't undo it. Well, because of that fact, you can know with near certainty that in 2 days, the city of Rishikesh is going to flood. And 4 days after that, Allahabad will flood. And a few days later, Benares. See? You're not forecasting the flood. You're just recognizing the inevitable downstream consequences of a reality that's already in motion. And this really shows you where the real work is. It's not about being some creative genius who can imagine wild futures. No. The hard part is the detective work, the painstaking observation of the world to find those predetermined elements that are already baked into the system. You know, things like demographic shifts or slow-moving technological changes. Wack argued that most screw-ups don't happen because of bad thinking. They happen because we just didn't see the facts that were staring us in the face. And this brings us to a huge critical difference. When most of us hear scenarios, we think of like a high-growth case and a low-growth case. Wack called these caricatures, and he said they were totally useless because all they do is confuse leaders and paralyze them with options. A real scenario, an effective one, doesn't focus on the outcome. It focuses on the driving forces. It tells you the how and the why behind different potential futures. It empowers leaders to actually use their own brains and make a judgment call. So if the point of a scenario isn't to predict what's going to happen, what is the point? And the answer to that question is maybe the most revolutionary part of this whole idea. It completely redefines what we're even trying to do when we plan. So let me ask you, straight up, what do you think the end goal of a strategic planning process is? You know, after all the meetings and the spreadsheets, what's the actual product? A big fancy report? A PowerPoint deck? Well, the real answer, Wack's answer, has nothing to do with paper at all. The true goal of planning is not to produce a document. It's to change the decision-maker's mental map of the world, what Wack called their internal microcosm. Think about it. Unless you can actually change how leaders see reality, their decisions are never going to change, no matter how brilliant your plan is. And Wack learned this lesson the hard way. His first attempts at scenarios were super logical, packed with data, and they explored 6 different futures. And you know what happened? His manager's eyes just glazed over. They were interested, sure, but they didn't do anything. Why? Because the scenarios didn't connect with their own intuition. They just left them, in Wack's own hilarious words, confused at a higher level of sophistication. There was interest, but zero action. And that failure led him to this huge mental shift. The goal was no longer about trying to create a plan that would be proven right in 5 years. The new goal was to use stories, analogies, and a deep understanding of the driving forces to fundamentally change the picture of reality inside the leaders' heads. He said this change was as big as a company shifting from a sales mindset, just pushing a product, to a marketing mindset, truly understanding the customer. So at the end of the day, what's the big payoff here? What do you actually get from embracing this new way of looking at the world? Well, it turns out it's about a lot more than just dodging bullets. So what does this kind of real foresight give you? Well, paradoxically, by leaning into uncertainty, you actually get a much better handle on risk, which means you can take smarter chances. It gives you a way to cut through all the noise and manage the insane complexity of the modern world. It sparks what Wack called input creativity. It gives you better raw materials to think with. And maybe the best part? Unlike that dead religion of forecasting, this process is actually fun. It's engaging, it gets people talking, and it brings energy back into the organization. Wack left us with this beautiful proverb. To polish a jade stone, you need another piece of jade, but it has to come from a different mountain. Scenarios are that other stone. They're not a crystal ball. They're a tool to sharpen our own perception of the here and now. So the real question it leaves us with is this. What predetermined elements, what forces, are shaping your world right now that you just aren't seeing? Thanks for watching The Explainer.